His revelation is just amazing, and it's so super, super amazing, encouraging book. So that's what we were talking about last week. You know, how God was commissioning Joshua to go forward. As you all know, everything that happened in that chapter. But God kept telling him in everything, to be strong and what? Courageous. Because how many of you know the things in the battles that he had to do were pretty rough? I mean, he had to just raw faith it. He had to just go out. And what was the number one motivating factor? I mean, this is kind of what I believe. But what do you believe was the number one, other than God saying, be bold, be strong, be of courage, go forward? Because he did it like 4 or 5 times in that chapter. What do you think he did to also push himself to do what God was telling him to do? What do you think? You can say it. Nobody? Well, he believed God. He believed who God was in his life, just like us. See, that's why God has this right here. See, everything is inspired in this word by God. Everything God had put on these pages so that they would show us and inspire us and help us understand how we are to live our life. But how many of you know that if we didn't have a Bible and no one taught us about Jesus, we wouldn't know, right? So that's kind of what this chapter 8 deals with, is that everybody came from, Moses and his teaching, and Joshua, and everybody from the time of Adam and everything moving forward, and Noah and everything. And what they had to do is they had to keep teaching the generations after them about God. Because if you don't, they won't know. So it's just like I have to tell my kids about their grandparents and what their life was like and what their legacy was like, because if they didn't know that, they would never know like where some of their roots came from and what happened in our life, earlier years on and things like that. So this is all about it, and why I have taught Danny and Liv about Jesus since when they were born, singing Jesus songs to them before they were born. You know how we all ladies, we all sing to our stomachs and things like that. These are all things that we do, telling the generations that are coming up behind us who Jesus is. It's super crucial, because as you saw in chapter 8, if y'all read it, that's it. These crazies are just crazies. They got crazy coming out of crazy, these guys. So, and gals, they're just crazy. So anyway, so it was just amazing how when I was reading chapter 7 and then you transition over to chapter 8, wow. I mean, they're whiners and complainers way over here from chapter 6, but then when you're moving, you see what they kept forgetting, and the ones that walked through some of it kept forgetting to share and push forward all the mighty miracles that God did. See, I don't know about you, but to me, that's the thing some days that gets me up. I mean, Pastor Chris, he's pretty hot, and my girls are pretty amazing. But you know who gets me up most of the time, every day? Is God. God is the one, because I know that I am here on this earth for him. And so when I look back and I think, and it's not because of all these things that God did for me, but it's just because God is God. And that God, without him, I couldn't deal with my husband. I couldn't deal with my kids. I couldn't be at both churches when I need to and travel the way that I do and, speak the way that I do. I just spent I was telling Danny, I think I've been on 5 trips or 6 trips in the last month, including, I said, this has been one of the most emotional couple of months for me, because my dad, we had to put him in a rest home in Minnesota, but yet he's cognitively totally there. But he had a surgery, he has a pacemaker, and he had a lead go from his heart to the pacemaker, another one, because they were trying to make him walk better. Well, now he can't walk at all. So I was like, what? So my brother and I went 2 weeks ago to Minnesota, and it was one of the hardest trips I had to make, because every day you had to put on your happy face, because I've never ever seen him in that state. And so now, because of where he is, he's around people. You've been all to, rest homes, and it's those are going to be their final days. And so he's just I mean, he does have, the pacemaker. He does have, COPD. He does have diabetes, things like that. But but really, the thing stopping him from going home is he can't walk, and he can't, because he falls, and then he can't get up, and it's crazy. So he needs a lot of care. So just seeing him in that state, and then talking to him, and where he's just pretty much, well, this is not where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. He is 80, but he talks like he's 60. He's like, this is not where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And so he's kind of giving up, is what he's doing, because he doesn't want to be there. And my brother and I were like, oh, my brother is kind of like a male version of me, but he has way bigger green eyes than I do. And he's the cutest thing. I'm not saying I'm cute. I'm just saying he is the cutest thing ever. And my parents had 5 of us, and my brother's the only boy. And he's a spitting image of my dad. So sitting next to him, I was like freaking out, the whole time. I'm just like, you two are so cute. I kept saying that. And it was just like, we would go in there and be as happy as we could. But, it was so hard because the last day we were there, my dad's doing his Abraham, Jacob, King David speech on us, his last speech on us, and how great we have been, and how he loves us, and he's not going to make it out of there. And I'm just like, could you please not do that? And I have one sister lives there with him, and then there's 4 of us in Reno. And so my other 2 sisters that weren't there, he was like, so, please tell your sisters goodbye. And I look at him, I said, I am not doing that. No, I'm not doing that, and, he's just, so when your will is involved, you don't know, even if he, seems a lot healthier than everybody else, you just don't know how far that will is going to take him, So it's pretty rough. So thank you. Please, if I could ask you to pray for him and pray for me and my emotions every day, because he's this strong, really prideful Italian that has just been he was a baby of the family, and he was just the cut up of the family, and super fun, and all the aunts and the nephews and nieces that have lost their parents before always would call on my dad and everything. So he's just amazing. So pray for that for me, because I just don't really want it to be his time yet. But of course, I'm happy if he's with Jesus. Well, when he will be with Jesus, but just not quite ready for that one. How about that? So anyway, that's my first sidetrack. Where am I? I don't know. Anyway, let's go forward. What was I talking about, Danny? I don't know. What? Oh, yeah, I do. But I don't know why I was saying that. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. Oh, I think I was saying it because of this. Because, when we go there, we always talk to my dad about, things in the past. Things that, he can share and push forward, to us. Because my dad's always been a musician. He's a really fantastic singer, fantastic drummer. And, his whole life, he was in a band his whole life up till he was 65 years old. And, just all these things. And it's just fascinating. And there's things that I still am learning about him. And I ask him about his parents. They came over from Italy, things like that. And it's just fascinating, his life and what he's lived. And he's the one who got saved with his brother. They're all, my mom too, were all just real devout Catholics, and they got saved, and this whole crazy fire of, God and Jesus came ripping through the families, and everybody got saved. And so that really we attribute all that to my dad, because he's the one who just there's something different to this Catholic thing, or there's something different to this God thing. And so, those are, and just little bits of pieces that I'm so thankful that he passes on to me, because there's things I just didn't know. And then I pass them on to Danny, I pass them on to Liv, we're always talking about them. And so these are things, they're not going to have them, forever, but it's I want them to have as much of them as we can. My mom, my little crazy mom, full of energy, will outlive everybody, 75, and she will paint my house tomorrow. I'm like, Mom, can we just rest for a minute? No, let's go. Let's do it. So that one's going to be around like forever. So anyway, all right, let's go to chapter 8, everybody. So we're talking about the judges. See, yes, I get another dark chapter. Oh, Lord. Okay. But this we're talking about 320 years, because it's kind of like from the years, the judges. We're starting from when God raised up judges to help his people after Joshua through this chapter goes all the way through Samson. So it's about 320 years, something like that span. But the upper story of this is God always tries to restore us back to him, always. So in this chapter, this is talking about, certain types of deliverers. As you know, Noah was a type of deliverer. Joseph was a type of deliverer. Of course, Jesus, the greatest deliverer of all that kind of stuff. But this is in this history period of, the Bible that we're studying. So it was like from 1375 to 1055. We're moving up to 0. Remember how this goes, how this works before Christ? So, in this time of history, God raised up judges, not to judge the people, but to lead the people. So that's really important, because God judged it all on his own. Okay, God was like, he knew exactly what they were speaking. He knew exactly what they were saying. And he knew exactly, because it says in the Bible that where Joshua died, he was 110 years old, and all of the generations that were with him, everyone served God until the last of the generations that were around Joshua died. Then they stopped. They stopped pushing it forward. Those last ones that died didn't press it forward to the new ones. So they were not remembering the things of God. So the lower story, of course, throughout this whole book, all these chapters, all of Judges, is, of course, rebellion against God, which is crazy. And really, before we read, so you guys can start turning, or, Doug, of course, will have it up on the screen, but I also like to read if you want, if your Bible or your phone, whatever you want to do. I want to read you some of this so you are understanding where it's all coming from, especially some of you that weren't able to read. Okay, we're going to go to Judges 2. And, but first of all, before I read that, we have to remember that in everything that God pronounced the blessing over, since, Abraham and everything, God said, if you follow my ways, if you, follow my statutes, follow my ways, do as I'm asking you to do. One of the things that God was also really strict about is not, intermarrying into other tribes. Why? Because they didn't have the God of Israel as their God. They had false gods and pagan worship and all that kind of stuff. So God knew that what would happen if they started getting mixed up with other tribes. And that's exactly a lot of what's happening here. And really since the last couple of, because the Hittites, the Jebusites, I can't remember all of the other ones, but they're all, the Canaanites, they're all in this land with the Israelites because of what's happening. God is giving, and you'll see that certain judges, they go and they attack some of these, leaders over these and these kings over these lands, but God just lets them all be there with them because of their complaining, because of their rebellion against God, because of their idol worship. It's like they're getting exactly what they're asking for. You know what I mean? And God's just like, oh, he's mad. He's like, what? After everything, and remember, go back to everything that God did since, we've been kind of having a review over the last couple weeks or months of what God's been doing in their life. It's phenomenal what God has been doing. So, but they broke the first 2 commandments, which are what? The first one they broke is that they will have no other gods before me. And they broke that thing like every day, okay? And then to not make idols or have idol worship. Well, they were doing all that. And so God was like, okay, you're totally getting into exactly the opposite of what I said. So they're in total rebellion against God. So let's read Judges 2. Now we're going to read a couple verses here. So y'all okay with me? Okay, so we're going to start 2, verse 11. It says, then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. Okay, now when it talks about this, when it talks about Baals, this is just idol worship, or what pagans that were against God, and their gods, what they worshipped. Okay, so when it talks about this. So it says, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of, am I reading the right chapter? Okay, sight of the Lord, and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were all around them, and they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. That's just another idol, other god. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. So he delivered them into the hands of plunderers who despoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Now, God, in many battles, would just say, like you learned in the last chapter, they just marched around the city and they took the city. They didn't even have to, and they blew trumpets. So, sometimes that's how God did things. He wasn't like, let's be in, hand-to-hand combat with swords and everything. Sometimes he would just do it in whatever ways he wanted. But all it was, I will deliver them into your hands. You just got to trust me. So here they're doing the opposite. So wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them, for calamity, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plunders them. Okay, so this is back to our upper story. God's always trying to restore back to himself. In that time, he's using the judges, back to himself. So he's always up deliverers and giving them a chance. He's still always listening to his people because his heart loves them. But he's also not going to, it's like with your kids. Are you gonna reward bad behavior? Well, no. Then you raise up, little bratty boos. It's what happens. And they don't listen to you. And, out of the house by 14 and 16. And I don't like you. So whatever. So God's trying not to do that. So verse 17, yet they would not listen to their judges, but they played the harlot with other gods and bowed down to them. They turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked, and obeying the commandments of the Lord, they did not do so. Verse 18, and when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. Verse 20, well, God always called them a stiff-necked people, and they're still a stiff-necked people. Then the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and has not heeded my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died. Wow. So then, through them I may test Israel, whether they will keep the ways of the Lord to walk in them as their fathers kept them or not. Verse 23, therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out immediately, nor did he deliver them into the hand of Joshua. So, wow, he was not happy. So this is, did we get the cycle or did we not? Okay, awesome. I want you to look at this. This is the cycle of what they consistently did. So you guys can write this in your notes, okay? So write disobedience first, because that's where this bugger is going to start. It goes from disobedience, and they keep repeating it like they have no sense, okay? So God, they disobey, consequences, repentance, deliverance. Okay, so write that up in your notes. So in disobedience, it says here that the children of Israel, you'll hear this or you've read it, did evil in the sight of the Lord, or moved away from God's ways. Okay, this is where their disobedience would come in. So this is their cycle. And sin would separate them from God. Not God separate them from them, but their sin separated them from God. And You know what would suffer? This is the greatest thing that would suffer, is their worship. Because if they don't worship God, just like us, if we don't worship God, if we don't teach our kids how to worship God, they're going to worship something else, like their play box or whatever it's called. What is it called? Xbox. I mean, really. Because to me, whatever gets more time than God, that's the worship where all your time goes. I mean, not like they're bowing down, I worship you. That's not what I'm saying. Don't say what I'm not saying. But what I mean is anything that gets exalted over God. So this is what would happen. And so their worship was suffering. If their worship would suffer, then they wouldn't spend time with God, and God couldn't talk to them and speak to them and help their hearts out. And so then they would get further and further away from God. And how many of you know when we get further and further away from God and our worship suffers, we get further and further and further away from God? Not even that God is far from us, but we get this feeling and this wedge inside of us that we don't think that God is there. He's there. But because of what we're doing and what we're thinking, where we are, because, our thoughts are not God's thoughts. So if we have crazy thoughts, God's not in those thoughts. So God's not in our thoughts. So if we do all this stuff, good things are not entering into our heart and into our soul and into our mind. So that's why God's like, we can't let this wedge come in here. You have to stick tight with your tribe. You have to stay together. You can't let all these things come in. Because I know you some weak people. Oh my gosh. So God knew what the Israelites were like, but he also knew what he was asking them to do. That's why he had all this stuff. I will take you through these lands. I will give these people to you. Because he knew at the moment of struggle, these buggers are going to turn. Sound familiar? I hope not. We have to remember the Lord. We have to remember his word over our lives. We have to remember the Holy Spirit in our lives. That's our strength. That's our guide. So they're just pushing it all aside. That's what they're doing. So then they move to consequences. Okay, the consequences. There's seasons of punishment and oppression. That's what happens. So they move from God, then they get into this where all these armies and now all these kings and all these tribes are coming against them. Where Israel is supposed to be in this promised land. They're supposed to be in this flowing with milk and honey, ruling over it, taking it, everything in harmony. No, now they've caused this to come back on them because they're coming against God. Remember when people would hear about the Israelites in past chapters? And what would happen? They would hear that the Israelites were coming and they would be shaken in their boots because they knew that God was behind them and God was before them and God was pushing them and God was fighting for them. They didn't have to do anything. All they had to do is walk into a territory and they'd be like, we out. Peace out. That's what they would do. So look at what they're blowing. They don't even have to engage in any battle. It's like, I'm just going to walk. And they just know I'm with God. So if you're not with God, you're not with us, you better be running. I better see your tail. That's how it is. Excuse me, they're not animals. People, backside. That kind of a thing. So amazing. But see the power when you're with God and see not the power when you're not with God? This is what's going on here. So here they're in this cycle and they go into this. So they disobey. They marry who they want. They do what they want. They sleep with who they want. They go all crazy. They worship who they want. Get all sideways. And then these consequences, oh God, and then they repent. Then repentance comes in, right? They cry out to the Lord for God to please help them. They wear me out is what they do. So they cry out, right? And what does the faithful God do? He raises up judges to help them. That's because God hears their crying. And in here it says, of course, he had pity on them. God felt sorry for them, for this. He knows they're not the smartest, tool in the shed. But he's like, all right, I'm going to help you because you do for some reason know that I am the one who can get you out. So you are crying out to me. So there's a couple lessons here. So remember the cycle, and I'll just kind of, so that this is what they keep doing. And I'm going to pass over because we can't go into each battle or anything like that. But you'll get it as, you know, when you read each chapter, you'll kind of go over it. But God's faithfulness, here is a lesson. There's a couple lessons we're learning. So why don't you write these down. God's faithfulness is not dependent upon ours, thank God. Thank God. It is not dependent upon ours. God always, since before time began, has had a plan for our lives, and we sabotage it. But God faithfully, and you can put this up in your life. How many times have you just sabotaged what God is doing in your life, or walked away, or not listened to God? Anybody in here? All right, all of us. We've all done it. But how faithful is God? Amazingly faithful. And he continually hears us. He continually says, all right, the couple things we need to do to get you back on track. Heard that before? Yeah, we all have heard it like a million times. But God is still faithful, like he's being here. You know, we reject God. We ignore God. We move away from him. But he never is far from us. He's just waiting for us to turn from our crazy ways and say, God, I'm sorry, this is my deal. All right, let's work on it. Faithful. Here's another one. Personal flaws don't, so that was kind of like the Israelites. That was kind of like, and us today, okay? This is kind of more talking about the judges and us today. But personal flaws don't exempt us from God's plans. Thank God. Because we all got some personal flaws, right? Look at the apostles. Look at who God chose. He could have done this thing by himself, but he didn't. Look at what he did. He chose some of the craziest, burliest guys that had like no sense in them. They were just, some of them crazy. Look at Peter, you know, denying him, all this kind of stuff. People doubting him, of his crew that he had. But guess what? They're exactly how we are. And that's why God chose them, because he's like, no, I need you, because I know you have great hearts. You just got to get past yourself. You just got to get past all this stuff. Like I always say, could the real person please stand up? Because I always feel like there's like, I know you're in there somewhere. Come on. And there we are. You know, then we're there, just sitting there going, you know, this person who really wants the things of God, you know, but they've been covered with, you know, upbringing and weirdism and abuse or whatever. Or just, you know, not understanding things. So we just keep putting these, like, you know, walls up in front of us and up in front of us, up in front of us. And it's like we no longer are seen. We don't even know who we are. And much less other people knowing who we are. So this is what happens. So we have these flaws in us. But look at your neighbor. I'm sure they got some flaws. Just go ahead and look at them. You're not being rude. Don't make faces at them, because guess what? And now, you know, if you had a mirror, look in the mirror, everybody. We all have flaws. But God has to use somebody. See, God sees us at these incredible states of you know, making it and destiny and going forward and pressing on. You know, that's how God always sees us. And I want to turn to Hebrews really quick before we talk just briefly, and then we're going to be done, about a couple of these judges that led these people, tried to lead these people as much as they could lead these people. And it worked for periods of time. But I love this scripture about them where it says in Hebrews 11:32, it says, well, actually, I want to read 30 through 34 because these are so awesome. So remember, because you learned this last week. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. They were encircled for 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also David and Samuel and the prophets. I mean, there's so many others who through faith, listen, this is where it is. They're flawed people. David was a murderer. King David, the greatest king over Israel of all time, who he made provisions to build the temple for God out of his own pocket. David, I mean, how much more? It's like he showed everything he could to love God, but yet he had these character flaws in him. But God loved him, and God moved worship through him like no other. Like he is known as bringing forth the new covenant worship. In new covenant, which is new covenant, it's through David. That's where it started. You know, where you come freely and you go to God. You don't have to go through a priest. You go through God. And it's just everything that's within you. He showed a form of worship in the Old Testament that, of course, Jesus did and finished and made it all. But he was the type and shadow of Jesus. He was the one who it all began through. And so all these people, I mean, all these amazing people, they had crazy character flaws in their life. But God still uses us. God uses all of us. We've got them. But you know what? The thing that puts us over is our faith. Because faith changes things. Faith moves mountains. Faith what? The Bible says faith pleases God. When we believe not what we see, but by the faith that we have in Jesus, not in us, in Jesus. So this is what moves us towards going forward to him, towards pressing on, towards not quitting. This faith that we have within us. This is what these people had. Every single one of these people, whether they knew it was faith or not, which the father of faith, which was Abraham, I mean, they just had to trust God. Like Noah, what is water? That kills me all the time. Why an ark? What is an ark? Why? You know he had to ask that. Just because, I mean, he trusted God and had faith, and you know he did it and he built it. But still, wouldn't that have passed your mind? What is that? Why? Okay. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously we know he moved forward in it. But wild. But see, in all this, who through faith subdued kingdoms. Look at Joshua. Be strong and of good courage. Would you go kill 1,000 people? One of these judges did that. Just like slash them to pieces. Because why? Well, they were the enemy and God said to do it. Because they brought all this craziness into their camps and all this evil. But he's like, what? I mean, these are big things that we had to believe God for in those days. Thank God we're not like that we are today in our military, but in a different way. But these are things where it's like, wow. But by faith, this is what they did. Then God's like, I'm going to raise you up to be the king over this region. Okay? What? I mean, would you just be like, what? If God wants it, that's what we do. All right. We're going to do it. So, subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises right there. We can't obtain the promises of God without faith because we don't believe what he's saying. We don't believe what he's done. We don't believe what he will do because we've chosen to not believe who he is. He's the one who continually makes our lives abound and go forward. And how can we forget that? You know, we've all had people in our lives. We've all had tough times. We've had people that have passed on. We've had parents. We've had kids. You know, rough stuff. But let me say, life has to still go on because we're still here. That doesn't make light of anything. But what it does is that God's like, I have to have you still move forward and do. Because until Jesus takes the reign here, although he is in full control, he is the king, he is in control of everything. But what I'm saying, until he comes back, we're moving for him. We're doing this stuff. We're pressing towards the high call that Jesus has called us to. So we do not stop in whatever realm. You know, we have rough times in our life. Okay, we got to get back to what God has called, because God's time clock never stops. But he does a lot of waiting. He does a lot of pausing on those time clocks. You know those, when you runners, you do those time clock things? What are they called? Stopwatch. I feel like God's always like, oh, okay, oh, okay, okay, okay. You know, stopping the needle here. Okay, 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 okay. Because we're not running. We didn't keep running. We're stopping. We're pausing. Hey, nobody knows our hearts more than God. Nobody knows more than God when we need a moment. But it doesn't mean we need moments of years and you know, decades. God's like, come on now. I mean, I'm with you. I got to mean more than that to you, then you can't get over this thing. You know what I mean? That's why he's here. He's like, I know it's going to be rough, and everything is not going to always be a bed of roses every day. It's not going to happen. So if you can consistently move your life through the ups and the downs, you're so going to make it. Because why? But see, we can't forget God. We can't forget who he is. We can't forget, because just think of, and I've said this before, you know, my soapbox is kids. And in like the school systems and with the things that they have to go through and the things that they have to see. I thank God for my faith roots and what God has brought me through to hold and be able to teach my daughter that went through school, that had major rough times at a point in her life with, you know, peers. Then my other daughter, who it's like, it's crazy out there. Where, you know, she was just telling me about, Mom, kids sit in the lunchroom. Don't let me forget where I am. Where am I? Huh? Yes, I'm here. I'm here on this scripture about, yes, these faith people. So she says, Mom, people sit in the lunchroom and they eat big, giant chocolate chip cookies. Okay. They eat big, giant brownies. Okay. Mom, they're weed cookies and weed brownies. What? Weed, like marijuana. Like Mary J. Wanna, like reefer. What other terms? That's all I know. I'm not a reefer person. I don't know anymore. That's just what I've heard. So the teachers don't even know. They're getting half jacked in lunch. And I'm like, what? Okay, I know, medicinal purposes, right? Whatever. You can all think what you want. I'm talking about kids in school. I'm not talking about all that other stuff. But I'm just saying that, wow, how far they've come. And the dress and the talk and the, like, I'll ask Liv, like we'll say things and I'll be like, oh my gosh, Liv. Like I still say, plug your ears, because so am I. Or I can't watch it. And I said, and I'm like 22 and I can't watch that. Liv, she's like, Mom, I see it like every day. I'm like, what? And so far, I mean, hello, I went to high school too, but wow. I mean, not like that far gone. So I was just like, really? I mean, seriously, Liv, is that the way it is? She's like, yes, Mom. So anyway, let's get back to this. So, people who obtain promises, we have to obtain the promises of God. We have to live in this life and be like God, because why? There's people all around us who have really creepy lives, including us at times. But creepy, like what happened? They need God. So you have to be the faith spokesperson. I'm telling you, you do. Tell your neighbor, you need to be the faith spokesperson. Say, you need to be the testimony police. You need to be the God police. I'm serious. We do. We need to be this, because what changes, when you mix your life that relates to their life and then you put God on top of it, that's a crazy mixture. That's a mixture for a miracle right there. So they're listening, and now when you give them because we can't save them, only God can, we can bring them to it, then that's where that thing explodes. So thank God for the experiences that you've gone through. Stop hating life and hating everything you walk through. Sure, we wish some things could have been a little easier, of course. But you know what? I can just imagine the grit that you have inside of you and the love that you have inside of you towards God, I hope. Because all of it is to move you towards God. God will use every nasty situation that we walk through and make it come on the other side full of just incredible love and peace and kindness and amazing things towards God. So that we don't live embittered, we don't live hurt, we don't live in pain with that thing, but only God can do that. So this is what he does. So we obtain these promises. These people were not obtaining promises. They were obtaining things. They were getting nothing from the Baals worship because they're dead, false, crazy gods. Well, some of them were however their gods that they lived or they worshiped in those days, but they were crazy gods that could do nothing except for witchcraft things or weird things. But that's not God. God is everything pure. God is everything good. So this is what they were lining their lives up with now, after God brought all their people from this. Stops the mouths of lions. Remember when David came against the lion and the bear? How about when you guys read, do you remember what happened to the lion in this story? From Samson? He tore the thing apart. Now, Samson was a big burly dude. That's the picture that we get. Tore it limb from limb. I mean, can you just imagine picking the thing up, pulling its legs off, and you got to be strong. Because that's one of the strongest animals in the kingdom. But can you believe that? Well, other than the elephant and stuff like that, but anyway. So, amazing. So these are things. So, quench the violence of fire, escape the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong. What? Yes, why? And I know I've talked about that here. God, in my weakness, you are made strong because you are my strength, because I don't have any more strength. So out of our weakness, we're made strong. Became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens, their enemies. That's what all this is happening. That's why we need to be on God's side, because this is what his provisions bring us. Okay? So they know. No longer, if these people just could hear, if they would move, and every time God would raise up these judges. Let's go to them. So, I'll get there in a minute. So, Joshua dying, lived out this life, which I already mentioned these. We must be generational. Write this in your notes. We must be generational builders and teachers. And that's what I've already been harping on. But that's just what I'm talking about there. We must be generational builders and teachers. We have to pass everything forward. Our generations coming up and behind us must be taught the ways of God, or they will have a crazy life. I'm telling you. They will have no peace. They will have nothing to lean on. They will have nothing, no hope in their life. It will all be lost. Because also, in God, we teach them how to carry themselves, how to speak, how to act around people, how to honor people, how to appreciate people, how to serve others. That comes from God. That comes straight from the heart of God. So we have to teach these things forward. We think we do that because our parents taught us that. No, we do that because God taught us that. That's why we do these things. And so to worship God and how to worship him and that he's worthy and that every day belongs to him. These are the things that we need to teach our kids. That it's not, we don't lift up our career. We don't lift up our job. Sure, we all need them. But that's not the focus of our life. Because especially in this day and age, the enemy is on a rampage against us and them. But we know a little bit more. We've been in it a little longer than them. So they're a little easier target. They're tougher than us, but they're a little easier target. So when he throws stuff their way, he throws big bombs their way. Because he knows they don't mess around. And once they get a hold of God, it's going to be on. It's going to be crazy against him. So these are things why we have really strong kids, and we have to help guide them in where their strength needs to be and come from. And that's God. So all this was happening, and we read this in Judges. So the people they're sinning against God. They're not doing what Joshua and his generation had said. They're not following after God's ways. So the first judge that was raised up, and we're not going to go through all of them, obviously, was Othniel. He was Caleb's nephew. Remember Joshua and Caleb? He was Caleb's nephew, okay? So he was raised up, and all I'm going to do is just tell you who he is and what happened. So he was one that God raised up after they did this. Can you put that cycle back up again? So after all this was happening in their life, God, from their disobedience to the consequences, then they repented, and that's when they cried out. And this, in the deliverance, this is who God raised up first. And so what happened was, God had them come against nations, come against the enemy, do all that kind of stuff. The Israelites were with them, because it said every time the judges were in power, then what happened is there was peace over the land for 40 years with this first judge, which meant that they were resting, which meant that what God had them do, see, their power was like there again, and the ones around them, they took care of, and they knew that the power of God was in the Israelites. But it's like they kept interchanging it and trading it back and forth. So then they got to a certain time. So after 40 years, the Israelites turned from God again. Here we go with the cycle again. So this is what they kept doing. So then Ehud was the second judge. Okay? So he ruled and had the land for 80 years. There was peace. So God did amazing things, and he delivered them for a long time. 80 years. That's 120 years right now that they had peace, and they didn't have striving, and they didn't have all this craziness going on, and life was in harmony, and they keep moving off of it. Crazy. Right? So then, after 80 years, they do it again. They did evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay? So then God raises up Deborah, and one of the army generals was Barak. And he wouldn't go out to battle without her. She was a prophetess, and she was a judge. So God raised her up. They went out. They did what they did, and it's all in the story. Can't go over all of it. But in this story, what was really wild is they came against the king of Canaan. In this story, that's who they went out against. And he had this crazy general called Sisera. Well, you know what Sisera would do? He had the people in oppression for 20 years. He was a crazy general. And what he would do is he was really crazy against women. And so that, to me, is why God raised up Deborah and Barak. Because he would go and just terrorize these Israelites. And what he would do is he would give, and I know you guys read the story, he would give 2 women per 1 man in these armies. That's what he would do. Just do whatever you want with them. Crazy fool. That's what he would do. Do whatever you want. Here, you, all of you, man, you each get 2 women to do whatever you want. So that went on for 20 years. So one of the women in the camp, so they're all going after Sisera and his army. They kill them all, and the king. Then they get to the king and they kill him too. He goes and flees and goes and tries to hide out in a tent. Well, this girl sees him, one of the women sees him. She drove a peg through his head. like, oh, guess what? You ain't going to do this ever again, you crazy fool. So this is how that happened. So, I mean, wild. So 40 years, Israel was back in peace. The Israelites back in peace after those judges. Then they did evil in the sight of the Lord. There you go. Back to their same thing. And now this time, and you know the whole story of Gideon, can't share all of it, everything he did. But the thing about Gideon was, and talking about how all of these had flaws in their life, and they were just like, God chose them to be their judges. But he was like in the lowest tribe, and he was the lowest person in the tribe. Not sure how that gets determined, but that's what they said about him. So even he was like questioning God like God, and he was so questioning God and himself. That's when he put those fleeces out, because he's like, could you just show me if this is really you, and this is really you talking to me, and really, which is crazy in its own thing. But he really didn't know why God was choosing him, So he's the one who did all that. And then the 32,000 men that he just thought to do, isn't this wild? How we have a plan of what we're going to do. So he gathers 32,000 men, and God goes, we need to have a subtraction party. So he's like, okay. And you read all the thing, the lap up, water like a dog, all that kind of stuff. So first of all, he says, all of you that don't want to fight, leave. Well, 22,000 men leave, and only 10,000 are left. Then it's go to the brook, and whoever laps the water, all that kind of stuff. So 9,700 of them are subtracted. So he's left with 300. 300. Like, God, wow. You pick me, and then you reduce me to 300 men. See, that's just because God said, I have to do this. Because remember, you Israelites, you weak, you crazy. He didn't say this, but they were. And he knew that they would take the glory for themselves, because look at their past. They have all this craziness coming up out of them. And he's like, you're going to take the glory. I know what you're going to do, because you turn on me every other day. Every time you change your sandals, you turn on me. That kind of a thing. So he's just like, I know what they're going to do. We're going to do some reductions here. We're going to pull these people away so that they know that I am the deliverer, and I am the one who's doing this. And I've raised up you deliverers to do this. It's not you, Gideon. It's the God of Israel who's doing this. So he let it be known. So with Gideon, they had peace for 40 more years. So God was doing amazing things. Then what did they do? They forgot their faithful, holy God, and God delivered them into the hands of, so this is what God did, delivered them into the hands of the Philistines. He's like, whatever, you guys. Wow. All right. Forgot him, all this kind of stuff. So he raised up Samson, the Nazarite. And there's things about him, but the biggest thing is you couldn't take a razor to his head and cut his hair. That was his strength. So he was trained and brought up a certain way in only the service for God. So, and his flaw was that he couldn't keep his eyes off of women. He loved them all. And he looked at them all. So that was a tough spot for him. So, you read the story, he had his wife, then they gave him to somebody else, and he was mad. So then, and then they ended up burning him. Who did this? Blah, blah. You remember he got the 300 foxes, tied their tails together. Just think about that. That's kind of a wild picture. Like wild. How do you fight? Well, okay, anyway. Stuck a torch in them, in between the tails, and put them through the Philistines' lands and vineyards and all that kind of stuff. Well, they were mad. So they asked who it was, and they found out who it was. Well, they killed his wife and his wife's dad. So then he's mad. And so he's on this vengeance, and he is no small guy to be messing with, right? He's mad. And so, he did all this. He's the one, gets the donkey's jawbone, kills 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone. Doesn't that seem crazy to you? wow. And he must have been super strong. So then, of course, you know the story. He falls in love with Delilah, and she's crazy. And, you know, she's bought with the price, of course. And, you know, they offer her all this kind of stuff. And, you know what happens? He ends up, you know, he tells her all these stories about his strength, and he's not telling her. He doesn't think that, which I'm like, he's kind of a little not that smart. You know, if he's like telling her these things and all these people keep doing this to him. I know he doesn't think it's her that's telling him. It's just like happening, but I'm like, hello, wake up. But no, he's all in love, right? Love's blinding and all that situation. So they ended up, you know, cutting his hair. That's his strength. Coming against him, of course, take him into captivity, gouge his eyes out, everything, so he can't see. And, you know, he then remembers and knows who he is, and his hair begins to grow back, which they didn't really count for that. It's just a haircut. It's not like, you know, you stop the hair from growing, right? So he asks God for this last thing for him to do against the Philistines. And of course, you know, he's in the temple and pushes the temple pillars down, and it kills more people than when he was alive, what he did. So it was this last thing. He took his life. Of course, it cost him that. But these are all people that God raised up to do. And under him, there was peace in the land for 20 years under Samson. But God used these people only because they were people of faith, because they all had flaws, just like we do. So I want you to look at yourself that, you know, God will choose whoever he wants to use, but you can't stop yourself at the things that you feel like you're short in, because we all have shortcomings. And don't let that be an excuse as to why you don't do something, because that's just an excuse. I mean, because God, you know, he used all walks of life, you know, and he can do whatever he wants to do if we just get with him on it. But they also all had dependence upon God. They trusted God. Even like with Gideon, you know, someone who thought he was so lowly. He's like, okay, God, you know, after he did his little thing with the fleeces, but he was like, okay, I'm doing this. Okay. So we have to really be careful that we don't give up our hope just because of, you know, things and how we've lived, or those around us, and is this worth it? Of course it's worth it. Tell your neighbor you're worth it. And tell them, and the ones we haven't met, they're worth it. Yeah, because, you know, to me, we have to, you know, God chooses the most unlikely people, but he chooses, to me, if you're chosen by God, which we all are, you have to understand that God has a ton of faith in you. And you have to take it as an honor. You can't take it as it's your right, or because you've been doing this for so many years, or because, that has nothing to do with it. That I don't care if you've been saved and doing things for a million years. Now, sure, if your heart is always towards God in that, God does amazing things through you, but he has been doing amazing things through you. But it's when he chooses you to do something, you have to immediately thank him and take it as it's an honor of what he's doing. Because God works through us. God speaks through us. He shows us things through his word, through what he speaks us, through other people. He tells us things. He reveals things to us. And for us to continually do what he's called us to do, we have to take him up on it. We have to believe him. We have to trust him. We have to keep, you know, we can't become like these people that didn't continue on in their pursuit of God and who God was. I mean, I've said this up here too, because it's the same in every city you're going to be in. It's the same in every church. Just because Joel Osteen has 100,000 people doesn't mean his staff doesn't have days where they're like, I ain't doing this. Oh, they do. Believe me, it's all relative. You know, and their kids' church people don't show up to. Happens everywhere. So all I'm saying is, you know, in life, I think one of the greatest churches that I've seen, that they just truly do life together, and truly it's just what they do and who they are, like in church, outside of church. I mean, I've never seen it modeled like this. I mean, other than, I think one of the greatest models is Hillsong, but I've never been there myself. But I think the closest model that I've been to is Pastor Charles Neiman's church in El Paso. But he's also friends with Hillsong, and he modeled a lot of his stuff after Hillsong, but he and his wife had some of their own models too, Pastor Charles. But I have never been in a place to where it never feels like they just do this on Sundays. I mean, when their daughter got married, the whole church did the wedding. They decorated, because this is what we think. We think like, when we're going to do things like that, it's going to be my family. And if y'all want to come, you can do that. Oh, no. They're like, no, you are my family, and you will be decorating for me. I mean, that kind of a thing, and not in a rude way. It's just, that's just what they do. And they clean. I mean, I would go and be in like any meeting, any room, any area I would be in and talk to someone. It was ridiculous what would come out of them. And it was like they immediately also put you into their family. They have an amazing grace to do that, where you feel like, okay, I'm joining this church tomorrow. Because it's like you feel like you're just one of them. And that's how it's supposed to be. And sure, I think if we did more, if we were more active with each other, if we maybe, had more things we did out in the community together or with each other at each other's city groups, things like that's what we're trying to do, then it would kind of feel more like family, because family is just family. I mean, some of you may have weird families, but I'm always talking from a decent family standpoint, because mine's really decent. In my family, we just flat out get together, talk loud, and eat a lot. And get louder as the night goes on. And that's just what we do. And so that's how church is supposed to be.